Greetings from Stanford University. I'm Bill Barnett, professor at the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability and the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
And I'm Samuel Minev Benzecry, junior studying Earth Systems and Linguistics.
And we have with us here in the studio today, Keegan Cooke, director of Stanford Ecopreneurship. And Keegan and his faculty directors, Stefanos Zenios and Yi Shui, ran a conference on ecopreneurship here at Stanford. And Sam, you were there at the conference. What were your reactions?
Pun intended, I think the scale was very impressive compared to the other conferences. And the diversity of backgrounds was also something that really called my attention, especially when speaking with people afterwards, because there are people in academia, there are people that are alumni and like work in the market, and there's undergraduate students there too. So I think there was like a huge diversity of people, at least like from the small sample I had, and it was interesting to see what type of people were drawn to the conference too, because it was not just people that are working directly with sustainability, but also like for a long time, but also people that were just getting their feet into it now. And I found that fascinating.
Oh, that's interesting. So Keegan, ecopreneurship, what's that about?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me, Professor Barnett and Sam. Ecopreneurship, as you can tell in the title, it's a mix of sustainability or ecology with entrepreneurship. And so we are on a mission to support entrepreneurs who are trying to achieve some impact in the world for environmental sustainability.
Wow. Well, that's on its face, it might surprise some people. What I'd like to do is maybe before we get into the conference and some of the things there is go to the issue, boy, entrepreneurs, they've already got a tall order. But then to have entrepreneurs also trying to deal with some of the world's fundamental sustainability challenges, why does that make sense?
Yeah, you said it. Entrepreneurship is already hard, no matter what problem you're trying to solve or what product you're trying to get out there. But doing that also with a goal of achieving some environmental sustainability outcome is even harder. And we consider it harder in many different ways. And therefore, our ecopreneurship programs in this conference are designed to be extra supplementary support mechanisms to help these entrepreneurs along their journey.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. So what are some examples, Keegan and Sam, from the conference of interesting ecopreneurs?
Part of the conference is what we call the Startup Showcase or the Innovation Showcase. And so we had about 50 to 60 different startups present their innovations. These are all Stanford-affiliated startups, and they really range the whole gamut. Sustainability is a very broad term, and we keep that broadness in our definitions. And so the teams that we saw ranged from new cement manufacturing capabilities to new software mechanisms for making energy-efficient decisions in the grid, new innovations coming out of labs on new battery technologies, fertilizers, everything under the sun.
You know, just taking those four, for our listeners' sake, cement is one of the major drivers of the release of greenhouse gases. And yet at the same time, face it, you got to have cement. I mean, all of us right now are probably sitting on a cement foundation. We move our vehicles on that walls and the built environment from it. So hearing that there's an innovation there is incredibly important.
And I'll just comment on that. When we're talking about achieving environmental outcomes at scale, we're usually talking about commodity markets. Yeah. And something like cement, you have to be cost competitive. You have to work well within the existing infrastructure that exists for cement manufacturing. And so while these ecopreneurs are trying to achieve some sustainability outcome, they're out-competing cement manufacturers with their innovations.
That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, as you say, Keegan, you've got with cement, massive fixed cost, meaning big a big average cost curve. So the minimum efficient scale of a cement manufacturer is tremendous. Of course, maybe they'd be acquired, maybe they could cooperate in that. There were also the software example you gave and the increasing efficiencies that come about from software that makes our economy so much more sustainable. And Sam, did you see any examples leap out?
There's one thing that I wanted to talk about, which was like a term that I hadn't heard of before, but it was very relevant to me, which was do it together instead of do it yourself. And I think a lot of the Silicon Valley, Bay Area culture was built on this idea of do it yourself, especially like looking back at the 60s and 70s. And I think this idea of doing together, like in some ways, reflects this optimization, especially when looking at across fields and getting people from different backgrounds and to solve complex issues was something that, I mean, might not appear too novel, but I think it's a framework that's changing a lot in the culture here, in light of ecopreneurship. So.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Keegan, you've been involved in entrepreneurship for some time, within Stanford's Center for Entrepreneurial Study, which is famous, of course, for its ecosystem of entrepreneurs. What came out to you as an interesting or surprising result from this conference, given all your experience?
Well, something that we constantly ask ourselves is, as an educational institution, what is different about ecopreneurial education versus normal entrepreneurial education? And something that we hear from this conference and interacting with our founders and alums is that there's themes that emerge in an ecopreneurial journey much more prominently than a normal entrepreneurial journey. And I can go down the list of those themes. One, as you mentioned, Sam, is this issue of scaling partners and doing it together with other partners to achieve the scale and that you want and at the speed that you want. And those partners come in many different forms, whether a government partner, an incumbent partner in the industry, or other startup partners. But there are other themes that emerge too. For instance, what we find is that ecopreneurs have to be a lot more creative in developing their capital stack than other entrepreneurs in other spaces. So our ecopreneurs need to leverage government grants when they exist, equity-based venture capitalists, more catalytic capital and philanthropic organizations, and they really have to get creative on how to leverage all of these existing funding sources to keep their venture going over the long term.
So yeah, that financing gives the ecopreneur runway, as they put it, and that runway or time is used not just to build the organization, but to get to a point where you've discovered what it is about what you do that the world will pay for as an entrepreneur. Some people, they like to call it product market fit, or they call it organization market fit, what have you, that fit where suddenly revenue starts coming in and you're seeing the success that every entrepreneur dreams about. And so what I'm wondering is sustainability part of that discovery of fit, or is it something that's separate?
What we're finding is that there was once talk about green premiums and having sustainability be a value proposition that resonates with certain customer groups. But we're finding that it has become de-emphasized more and more over time, and that when trying to achieve scale, competing against these commodity players, these large industrial infrastructure players that already exist, that you really have to outcompete on cost and features and other things. So the sustainability aspect of it becomes less and less emphasized in a company's marketing efforts, in their communications with different customers. However, it is still very important for the founder themselves to stay resilient along this very long ecopreneurial journey. And it's very important for building their team as well, who are all mission aligned on that sustainability mission. When it comes to capital allocation, in the early days, that mission for sustainability also becomes very important in choosing the type of investors or capital relationships that you have. But over time, as you grow and scale, the sustainability aspect of it becomes less and less emphasized.
Interesting, less and less emphasized. But are there some examples, Keegan, where sustainability, though maybe less emphasized, still remains central to the logic of the business?
I think you're spot on, Professor Barnett. Something that we really preach to our ecopreneurs is that throughout their scaling journey, even as their organization grows, their manufacturing grows, their customer base grows, they need to stay true to their initial sustainability goal, because it can very quickly become an issue where you're deciding between a profitable outcome versus an outcome with more sustainability benefits. Oftentimes, these ecopreneurs have to make very tough decisions on what markets to go after, how they scale to achieve not only the profitable outcome that their investors might want, but also the sustainability outcome that drove them to start this company in the first place.
So, Sam, as a student here at Stanford, going to a conference like this, you'd be exposed to great examples such as what we've just been talking about, but also some frameworks for thinking about starting a business. And did you take anything along those lines away from the conference?
Yeah, I think most important of all, there are like series of problems concerning sustainability in the world. But from one of the discussions I was having between one of the two panels, the concept of the 4 T's came up when like formulating a new project or business. The 4 T's: team, timing, technology, and total addressable market. And I think that's something that stuck to me, especially by looking at some of the previous examples of businesses and that were leaving the early stage into the late stage. And I think looking at those trends overall was quite enlightening for making sense of how the ecopreneurial landscape is currently looking like and will look in the next decade or so.
Oh, that's super interesting. So as we wrap it up, Keegan, do you have any final words for our audience about what we're doing here in ecopreneurship?
I think the themes of the conference and the theme of our ecopreneurship programs is this combination of optimism and the power of entrepreneurship to make real, lasting change in the world, and also mix that with realism and what that change actually looks like, what the actual constraints are, the scale of the problem at hand. And Professor Barnett, I just want to call out your talk in particular. When you talked about the sustainability revolution, you gave an amazing picture of both optimism and realism of what this sustainability revolution looks like.
That is what we're looking forward to as we go into the rest of the 21st century. And Sam, as our representative of the 21st century, thanks for co-hosting today's podcast. Keegan Cooke, Director of Stanford Ecopreneurship, thank you for coming on board. And to you listeners, from me, Bill Barnett, on behalf of Stanford University, until next time. The Stanford Initiative on Business and Environmental Sustainability podcast series is sponsored by the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. Music by Charged Particles. That's Caleb Hutzler, Mike Rock, and John Krosnick.